My husband raised his glass to celebrate my humiliation. His mother smiled like she had waited years for that moment. Then the restaurant doors opened, and every federal agent in the room turned toward me. My name is Briar Wickham, and until that night, I had perfected the art of looking harmless. I was 34, married to a man named Grant, and seated beside his family at a private anniversary dinner I had paid for without anyone knowing. The chandeliers made everything look expensive, even the lies. Grant kept his hand on my chair, not my shoulder, like I was furniture he owned. His mother, Elaine, tapped her spoon against her wine glass. "Before dessert," she said, "we have a little announcement." Grant's smile tightened. I felt his fingers press into the back of my chair. Elaine lifted a folder from her purse and placed it on the table. Inside were copies of my medical records. She looked straight at me and said, "Since Briar can't give my son a family, we've decided he deserves a fresh start." Then Grant stood up beside another woman. The woman beside Grant looked younger than me, but not by much. What unsettled me was how comfortable she seemed standing in my place. She rested her hand against his arm as if they had rehearsed that movement. Nobody at the table gasped. Nobody asked whether the records were private. Elaine folded her hands and said, "Her name is Vanessa. She understands what marriage means." Grant would not meet my eyes. I stared at the papers spread across the white tablecloth. 3 miscarriages. 2 surgeries. Every diagnosis I had begged him to keep between us. I remembered crying against his chest after the last hospital visit while he promised those losses belonged to us, not the world. He had lied with frightening ease. Vanessa leaned forward. "I didn't know she would be here." Grant answered for me. "She needs to hear it." The words landed harder than the betrayal. I stood because I thought my legs would collapse if I stayed seated. My purse slipped from my shoulder and hit the floor. A sealed envelope slid halfway out. Elaine noticed it first. "What's that?" she asked. I picked it up and almost laughed. Grant thought those papers could destroy me. He had completely forgotten the document he made me sign 6 months earlier. Grant's face changed the moment he recognized the envelope. He knew exactly what was inside. He had walked into my office 6 months earlier carrying flowers and apologies after another argument about money. He claimed our marriage needed transparency. He said couples who had assets were already planning divorce. I believed him. My father had left me a small commercial building before he died, and the rental income quietly paid most of our bills. Grant convinced me to sign a management agreement letting him oversee the property while I recovered from surgery. He called it protecting me. My attorney called it reckless. I hired her anyway. She insisted on adding one condition that Grant barely read because he was busy celebrating his victory. Any attempt to transfer ownership without my written approval would trigger an immediate fraud review and freeze every connected account. I looked at the envelope and remembered her last words. "Keep this close. One day, someone will show you who they are." Elaine reached across the table. "Give it here." I pulled it back. Grant finally looked at me. His voice was almost gentle. "Briar, don't make a scene." I realized he was not worried about losing me. He was terrified that I had already figured out what he had been doing behind my back. I looked at Grant and saw a stranger wearing my husband's face. For years, I had blamed myself for every crack in our marriage. I thought grief had changed him. I thought losing our babies had made us both colder. Standing in that restaurant, I finally understood that kindness had simply made me easier to use. I opened the envelope. Inside was not one document, but a complete copy of the agreement, along with letters my attorney had prepared if anything happened to me or my property. Grant reached for my wrist. "Put that away." His voice shook. Elaine noticed it too. She stopped smiling. I stepped back and asked one question. "How much did you promise Vanessa?" The color drained from her face. Vanessa looked at him, confused. "What does she mean?" Grant stayed silent. I turned the papers toward the table. 3 transfer requests. 2 forged signatures. 1 application to sell my father's building. Every page carried dates matching the nights he told me he was working late. Vanessa picked up 1 copy. Her hands started trembling. "You told me the building belonged to your family." Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then my phone rang. It was my attorney. I answered on speaker. Her first sentence froze everyone at the table. Briar, the bank just confirmed someone tried to empty your accounts tonight. The entire restaurant went quiet. I could hear ice settling inside abandoned glasses and the slow hum of the air conditioner above us. My attorney did not raise her voice. They failed, she said. The fraud lock activated exactly as we planned. Grant's chair scraped across the floor. What fraud lock? She answered before I could. The one attached to every account connected to Briar Wickham's property. Vanessa lowered the papers and stared at him. You said she didn't know anything. Grant ignored her. He looked at me the way drowning people look at the shore. Briar, listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. I almost pitted him. Almost. I told my attorney to continue. She explained that the attempted transfer had automatically notified the bank, our insurance company, and state investigators because forged signatures were involved. Copies of the documents had already been secured. Elaine stood up so quickly that her chair tipped over. You planned this. I shook my head. No. I planned to trust my husband. Vanessa stepped away from Grant. She opened her purse, pulled out a small velvet box, and placed it on the table. Inside was an engagement ring. Her voice barely carried across the room. He proposed to me this afternoon. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. He told me he was already a widower. The ring stayed on the table between us like evidence from a crime scene. Nobody touched it. Vanessa looked at me, then at Grant, searching for one honest face in a room built on lies. He reached toward her, but she stepped back. You said she died inside our marriage, she whispered. Grant swallowed hard. I can explain. She laughed once, a broken sound. My father was buried with less lying around him than you. Elaine grabbed Vanessa's arm. Don't embarrass this family. Vanessa pulled free. I was never part of your family. For the first time that night, I saw another woman realizing she had been used, not chosen. My anger toward her loosened. Grant had sold us different stories because he thought women were easier to manage than the truth. My attorney spoke again through the phone. Briar, investigators want to know if you authorize a formal complaint. Grant looked at me. His eyes filled with tears I would have believed years earlier. If you do this, you'll ruin my life. The words settled over the table. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Only fear for himself. I looked at the engagement ring and understood the final betrayal. He had planned another wedding before ending our marriage. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was tired. The woman across from me had been promised my future, and the man between us had expected us to fight over him like he was a prize instead of a warning. I picked up the engagement ring and closed Vanessa's fingers around it. Keep it, I said. You'll need proof that he lies. Grant stared at me. Briar, please. That word used to soften me. It did nothing now. I told my attorney to file the complaint. She answered with one quiet sentence. It has already been submitted. Grant blinked. What? The bank requested immediate action, she said. Investigators are on their way. Elaine called me cruel. She said families survive mistakes. I looked at the woman who had exposed my medical records to a room full of strangers. You stopped being my family before dinner started. Grant reached for my hand. I stepped away. The restaurant doors opened again. 2 investigators walked inside carrying folders. One of them asked for Grant by name. The other looked directly at me. Mrs. Wickham, we recovered another set of forged documents. I frowned. There shouldn't be another set. The investigator opened the folder. The signature at the bottom was my late father's. The investigator placed the papers in front of me, and I knew they were fake before I touched them. My father signed everything with a fountain pen that always left a tiny break in the first letter of his last name. The signature on those pages was smooth. Grant had never noticed that. I had. The investigator asked whether I wanted to make a statement. I looked at Grant. His shoulders had collapsed. Elaine stood beside him, but even she would not hold his hand. Vanessa quietly slid the engagement ring across the table toward the investigators. For the record, she said, he gave me that while his wife was sitting at home. I gave my statement. I told the truth. I did not exaggerate. I did not protect anyone. Grant started crying when they told him the forged documents, the attempted transfers, and the false filings would become part of the same investigation. He begged me to help. I remembered the hospital room where he promised we would survive every loss together. Then I remembered him introducing another woman while my private pain sat on a dinner table. I walked out without answering. The night air felt lighter than my marriage ever had.